Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Not Just Politics podcast. Today is Friday, December 6th. Our guest today is the Associate Director of the College Debates and Discourse Alliance and a graduate of Denison University with a double major in International and Global Studies and Political Science. Sadie Webb, welcome to the show.
Hi, Carson. Happy to be here today.
Uh, for for our listeners that don't know, the College Debates and Discourse Alliance is a partnership between Bridge USA, Braver Angels, and the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. And how did you get involved in this work?
Yeah, that's right. So we are a coalition of three different nonprofit organizations, the three that you just listed. And each nonprofit brings something really unique to the team. But together, the College Debates and Discourse Alliance, collaboratively works to host debate and dialogue programming on campuses all over the US. And so I actually got involved with the program when I was still an undergrad at Denison University. I co-founded the Denison debate team. We started, going to debates, doing really well, and then COVID hit, and debate doesn't really work well via
Mm-hmm.
Zoom. Competitive debate doesn't, at least. And so we came across Braver Angels style debates, and we're like, well, wow, this is really cool, right? Denison during COVID was an insular campus, and so we were able to still do activities on campus for students and staff. And so we partnered with the College Debates and Discourse Alliance and started hosting Braver Angels debates on campus. Fast forward a few years, I graduate from college and get a job in the comms department at ACTA, where I'm still working now in Washington, D.C. And after about 3 months in the comms department, ended up transitioning over and joining the College Debates and Discourse Alliance full time, because the director of the program, we have an incredible director, Doug Spry, was like, hey, you worked with us in undergrad, and you have a history of debate, and we would love to have somebody like you on our team. And so I'm really, really lucky. I am in a created position. And so over the past 2.5 years, have really got to grow personally and professionally in the Alliance. And, the team has grown really extensively over the past few years. And so, yeah.
Mm. And where was the first? Did we meet in Gettysburg? Is that the first time that we met?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. So that was the first kind of time that I was really introduced to the larger Braver Angels and civil discourse bridging space.
Mm-hmm.
I'd hosted debates before, and I was starting to go around and travel and moderate debates on college campuses. But I do believe that's the first place we met, was at the Braver Angels convention in 2023,
Three.
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Gettysburg. Yeah.
Yeah. That was the same for me too, because I had been to the Bridge USA Summit um, that previous February, but that was also kind of the first time that I had realized how big of a community that was.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a really cool situation, that there are so many different organizations and entities that exist in this space that are doing this work. We partnered with the National Governors Association earlier
Hmm.
this year, with Spencer Cox as part of his Disagree Better initiative, and we're kind of joking that he said, oh, I want to do something within the bridging space, and turned on the faucet, and just water comes rushing out, because there are so many organizations in this space doing this work. And what we're seeing more and more is these organizations are starting to come together and be more collaborative, which I think is really inspiring.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that was something that I saw a lot of too at Kenosha this year, was
Hmm.
just so much collaboration between all of those different organizations. And
Yeah.
um, what did you think about watching that debate in that chapel with all of those people in Kenosha?
I liked it, honestly. It was intense, but I think it
Hmm.
was what was needed. I grew up in a very politically divided household.
Hmm.
My dad is pretty conservative leaning. My grandma, she just passed, but she
Hmm.
is a part of our nuclear family and, was very, very left leaning, true blue Democrat through and through. And so for me, right, like political discourse was always a part of life, right? You have political debates at the dinner table and then, you eat dinner with your family. But sitting in that chapel in Kenosha, it was so cool to look around and see so many people having this experience that I've had my entire life. And, for many people, this was the first time they were engaging with somebody or existing in a space with somebody that they disagree so strongly with, but they're still sitting there respectfully and civilly. And so I think it was really powerful, especially just because of how many people were there doing it together.
Yeah, there was probably a few hundred people
Yeah.
in that room. It was a lot. And I just remember that everybody was laughing the whole
Yeah.
time. Everybody
Yeah.
just laughed.
Yeah. I think people, regardless of who people were planning on voting for, there was a shared sense of anxiety in that room.
Yeah, yeah,
And it really brought folks together.
it did. Who would have thought that the actual unity comes in fear?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fear is
That's so sad.
unfortunately very, very strong, but you know, in that
Um,
space specifically, people were quite unified.
yeah, they were. With all the traveling to different college campuses that you've done and all your time doing this work, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you run into about
Mm,
what the bridge building community is and what it does?
yeah, that's a good question. I think there are two large misconceptions about the bridge building community. The first misconception is that we're trying to create a world of moderates, right? Which is
Hmm.
absolutely not what's going on. The second is that it's just a big kumbaya circle, right? And we're just trying to get people to come together and hold hands and, just have a big happy-go-lucky, like feeling
Yes.
circle. And for both of those things, I think they're clearly misconceptions in my mind because we're not trying to create moderates and we're not just having a kumbaya circle, right?
Hmm.
Bridging work is hard, and in all of the debates and dialogues that I moderate and facilitate and get to participate in, oftentimes they do feel really nice because we often end with a debrief. What was this experience like? What was sitting with somebody that you disagree with and really exploring their ideas and sharing your identity, listening to them talk about their identity? It's powerful and it has a positive impact on people most of the time. But this work is also really hard. And oftentimes, some of the most impactful conversations are the ones that you sit through and you're like, wow, that was tough. That didn't feel incredible, right? But that is what bridging is about, right? Not just leaning into the incredible feelings that we get when we have a positive conversation with somebody that we disagree with, but recognizing the way that we're able to grow when we have a productive conversation with somebody we disagree with, even if it's uncomfortable, right? Um, and those productive conversations happen because people disagree, right? And so that's where I say, no, we're not trying to create moderates, right? You're entitled to your opinion. I'm entitled to my opinion. Every single person in this country gets to have their own opinion. And when we have opinions that differ from one another, we actually will become stronger as a country.
Do you ever get the claim that the bridge building organizations are just run by sneaky conservatives that are pretending to be moderates that are up to no good? I don't know. I guess the most charitable version of that argument is that they think there are um, that there are conservatives on campus that want spaces to say whatever they want without consequence.
Yeah.
So they create spaces where they claim that it's sort of an open thing and that it's for everybody, but then they end up saying whatever they want, and then that makes the space not friendly towards everybody. I guess that's the most charitable
Yeah,
version
like
of that argument.
the concern of like the free speech as the conservative Trojan horse almost, right?
Right. Yes. Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
I've heard it, right? I don't agree with it.
Yeah.
I'm an incredibly liberal person. I have very strong progressive views. And so for me, when I think about it, it's actually really hard for me to wrap my head around this like free speech as a conservative Trojan horse, right? Because when we look at any of the major social or political movements that have really brought about what I would consider positive progressive change in this country, the basis for those is free speech, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that it's hard for people to sit with things they disagree with. And, it's hard to hear things sometimes, but we have to be able to maintain free speech in order to make real progress in this country, right? If we
Mhm.
disagree with somebody's ideas, we can't just shut them down and silence them, right? We have to beat them out with better ideas through debate and through dialogue.
Mm. Yeah, because that's the one thing I don't think people realize. I think the average person, if they look at the bridge building community, they probably don't guess that it's a space that's actually dominated by blues. Not
Yeah.
dominated by blues, but it's a space where blues are, I would say, significantly outnumbering reds, and
Yeah.
that we're having trouble bringing reds into the movement. I don't think that's something that people would think if they looked at that space.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think it's interesting too, right? Like the dichotomy between reds and blues in this space, but also the increasing amount of young people in this space who don't identify as red or blue, right? So I'm incredibly liberal. Yes, me too. So I'm incredibly
Mhm.
liberal, hold a lot of very progressive views, but I can't allow myself to identify with one party or the other because I think there are inherently massive problems with each of them. And
Mhm.
so bridging for me is also about creating a space where, regardless of what you believe, there's an opportunity for your voice to be heard.
Now, when you say something like that, do you get critiques that, like, that's both sidesism and stuff like that? Do you run into any of that?
That's both sidesism. What do you mean?
Yeah, the fact that you would say that, like, there's inherent problems with both parties, and there are people I think that I am surrounded by in school that would say, yes, there might be problems with both parties, but one of them
Mm,
is slightly less bad than the other, and then
hmm
therefore I don't, and then therefore comparing them, saying that they're equally bad, is no longer a valid comparison.
mm. I mean, I think that you can have issues with both parties and still recognize that we exist in a two-party system right now.
Mm,
And if you want to engage in democracy, I mean, I guess you could be voting third party, right? But for
mm,
me, I'm somebody that's going to engage in democracy as it as it functions now. But that doesn't mean we can't critique it, right? And that's the
mhm,
importance of free speech. I can sit here and say I have challenges with both sides, but also recognize in my mind I may identify with one side more strongly than the other. That doesn't mean I can't critique it, right? It's about, for me, not falling into just this blind following, right? Just, oh well, this side is the lesser of two evils, therefore it's okay, right? In my mind, the lesser of two evils, there are still problems that can be critiqued and that should be collectively challenged and worked to overcome.
mm. What tips do you have for for people out there that want to have conversations with family members that they disagree with politically, or with close friends? What kind of conversation tips would you give people?
Yeah. Well, I think these are conversation tips that you will definitely be familiar with, Carson, just based
Mm,
on your experience with debates and dialogues, and bridge conversations. They are tips that really guide that, we call them our core norms, and they guide the conversations and debates that we have. The first one for me is listen to truly listen. I think it's really easy for people to listen to respond, right? Somebody says something and your immediate reaction is, oh, I gotta jump in, right? But as soon as you start doing that, you become disconnected from truly understanding what this person is saying. So hearing somebody out in its entirety, not interrupting them, and in that, practicing sitting with your discomfort. Right? Somebody might be saying something that makes you a little uncomfortable, or that bells are going off. You're seeing red flags left and right, but sitting with it and letting them say what they have to say, start to finish, so that you can really listen to understand. And then taking a moment to reflect, take in what they said before you move forward and engage with them. I think the other thing is asking questions, right? Asking people questions like, why do you believe that, right? What experiences have you had that are impacting your position on this? How do you think we should be doing this? Can you clarify what you mean, right? Practicing active listening skills and engagement skills, like saying things, Carson, what I'm hearing you say is this. Am I understanding you correctly, right? Really entering into conversations and dialogue with good faith, so that you can better understand them, and in turn, hopefully they'll better understand you.
Hmm. Yeah, those are important. I think that too many people walk into those conversations trying to win something,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I don't think it does anybody any good.
No, it doesn't. And, a lot of research has been done, right? That when you present somebody with a fact, even if it directly disproves their belief, it doesn't actually change their mind. All it does is further alienate them from the conversation. And so the basis of constructive dialogue is empathy and establishing that, humanitarian connection between people, so that we can really work to better understand where we're coming from.
Yeah, yeah. So what I'm thinking then is like what I've heard from some people, from like family members, whenever I explain that sort of idea, or other people I talk to would say that I guess their concern would be that if we are saying that facts are no longer the bedrock of a debate, in the sense that that would be the determiner of who's right and who's wrong, and if
Mm.
we're just focusing on a humanitarian aspect, then what happens to objective truth?
Mm. See, and I think what's really important, and what I want to emphasize here, is I'm not saying abandon the fact, right?
Mm,
But in order to really have a productive, meaningful conversation with somebody, before you start saying these are the facts, this is where I get my facts, this is how I'm weighing the merits of this research or what this author is saying, you have to build that trust with people, right? So I think about conversations I have with my dad, for example.
mm,
I've known him for my entire life,
mm,
obviously. um, and even when we have political conversations, and we are political polar opposites, we don't just start with, oh well, why do you think that Donald Trump is going to be a good president for this
mm,
country, right? We don't start with, well, why are you believing what you believe, right? We
mm.
start a little bit softer, because that means when we start saying, well, when he says, I feel like you haven't done enough research, right? And I say, well, I don't know if I can trust what you're presenting as research. We have that empathy for one another, and that's the starting point.
Yeah, I think that's important to like start soft, because so many people just go right into the deep end
Yeah.
immediately, and then they wonder why it didn't work.
Yeah.
Because and I honestly think that the man on the street content might be to blame for this, because every
Yes.
time it's always the craziest person you've ever seen,
Yep. Yeah.
and
No.
then there's like nobody reasonable that ever makes it into the final cut of those videos.
Well, and when we think about why that is, right? Because that's what sells,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
That's
it's
that's what's
popular.
funny. That's what's engaging, right?
Hmm.
We're in a society that values sound bites. We're in a
Yeah,
society that
yes,
values headlines. And so,
yes.
crazy man on New York street says something radical is so much more interesting to so many people, then two people have a respectful, productive conversation. But we have to
Uh,
change.
yeah, yeah. I don't, because I think people, because I think in those situations, people look at them and they go, "Oh, that's a win. Oh,
Yeah,
you owned that liberal on the streets of Pittsburgh,
yeah,
and, and therefore I'm gonna go home to my dad that voted for Biden
yeah,
and just fire one off." It doesn't work.
yeah. Well, and I think we have to think about like, what are you counting as a win, right?
Yeah, that's another good
Is
question.
is the win making a really good point, maybe doing it a little sassily, and you owned the lib, or you
Yeah.
framed the right, you got that soundbite, but you probably alienated people a little bit? Or is the win
hmm
engaging and understanding? Yeah.
do you think is there a way to restrict? I've asked this question to so many people because I'm just so curious about this. Like, I wonder if there's a way to actually just is there a way to just sort of change the incentive structures of social media to value that and still make money? Like, I because it's all just clicks, all just people clicking on stuff. So it seems like that has to be more of a societal change before it's just changing the way that the algorithms work.
That's a good question. I don't know, but I
Yeah,
hope so.
yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I really hope so. And I think it starts with us, right? I think it
hmm
starts with young people taking a step back and really considering, right, like, what is social media for? Is it for building community in an effective way, or is it for, making money, right? And
Yeah.
maybe it can be both, but I don't know entirely.
Did you see Mark Zuckerberg surfboarding with an American flag in his hand with a beer in a suit on the 4th of July?
Yes.
It was one of the greatest. I thought it was AI for a second, but it's interesting. He seems to be taking a weird turn. Like he's almost trying to like cozy up with Trump a little bit, it seems, for
Mm,
whatever reason, saying that like, the COVID stuff from the White House was a mistake and this, that, the other thing. And it's interesting to see if the platform will at all change,
yeah.
going with him. Like I don't know if he's necessarily moving more to the right. It might just be a business decision too. Who knows what he's doing that
Yeah.
for?
Yeah.
Um, but it's just interesting to see that like I don't know. It's weird for me. Like a lot of those people in that like billionaire class have always kind of been steady characters. To see
hmm
Zuck all of a sudden do this shift very quickly was just kind of interesting to see. But anyway,
Yeah. No, it is. It is interesting to witness.
and Musk is doing it too. The picture of him jumping on stage at the Trump rally in Pennsylvania is my favorite photo I think that came out of the Trump campaign.
Why?
Huh? Well, huh?
Why?
Just because I don't know. It's just like it's just to have him come out on the stage with a hat that says dark MAGA in front of all these boomers and then start like dancing and then he starts talking in meme. He's like using meme internet language and half of these people probably don't even know who he is or like what he does. Like they haven't heard of space. Like who knows? And it's just funny to me to think about Trump walking out with Elon Musk and Elon just doing like the clumsiest, most awkward jumps you've ever seen a person do.
Yeah. Well, I've heard he's making an X, right? Or trying to make an X.
Oh, with his you heard that's what he was trying to do? That's even dumber.
Yeah.
That's somehow worse. That is
I don't
somehow
know if it's
worse.
real, but that's what has been that's what I've heard.
Sorry, I'm going off the rails here for a second, but this whole Department of Government efficiency thing has got to be the most elaborate. If I hope that this is just the most elaborate Babylon Bee sketch that's like ever been attempted, because to say that you're going to clean up the federal government by creating an entirely new bureaucracy
Yeah.
and then saying that it's going to be run by not one but two people.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think there's a little bit of hypocrisy, right? There's too much bureaucracy. So what are we going to do? We're going
we're
to
gonna
make a bureaucratic brain.
we're gonna make a new one. It's just
I
so
don't know if
funny
I
to think
understand it,
about.
but I'll be interested to see how it
Well,
unfolds.
and did you see the logo that they put out?
No, I haven't seen the logo yet.
Well, the logo is the crypto dog. It's Doge. This is what I'm saying.
Right.
This has to be the most. This is like a troll game. They're not even trying to hide anything anymore. They're just having fun, I guess.
Yeah.
Jeez. Okay, getting back to this. Um, so something that we saw after the October 7th attacks was those hearings from the presidents of UPenn. Was it Harvard? And there was one more. It was another Ivy League. I forget which one it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in front of Congress, and there was that whole thing that happened, and what Harvard fired their president, and then I think what we started to see over the next couple of months was universities saw the backlash that they were getting from taking ideological positions. And what we've seen more recently is institutions are going back to adopting positions of neutrality on things like the Israel Palestine conflict. And in general, they seem to be moving in more of a direction now. I think that's been from pressure from organizations like FIRE and the Heterodox Academy
Yep.
that have put out these open letters, sent them to universities saying, "Hey, we encourage you to do this." I
Yeah.
don't know if they sent Point Park a letter. Um, I, it's a private institution. They said they sent them out to private institutions, so I'm not sure, but I'd be curious to see if we got one. But
Yeah.
so, what do you think? What do you think the importance of, why does that matter? Why do universities taking these sort of institutional neutrality positions make a difference?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think why it matters is also incredibly connected to what we've seen happening on college campuses in the past year in response to what happened on October 7th, 2023.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So institutional neutrality is incredibly important because higher education has to be a space for every voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is higher education is the place to develop ideas, which means hearing new ideas and challenging ideas, right? I kind of mentioned this a few minutes ago, right? But if you disagree with someone or something somebody believes or says, you can't just eliminate it, right? You can't
Mm-hmm.
eliminate them. You can't eliminate
Yeah.
their right to say that or to think that. And so you have to engage with it, right? You have to engage with it in a way that allows you to that allows really the best ideas and the truth to come to the top, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so universities have to maintain their ability to foster and create spaces where this can happen. And so thinking about right what happened October 7th, 2023, we saw a huge reaction and outcry on college campuses, right? And I think it's very reasonable because the events of that day were absolutely horrific.
Mm-hmm.
We also saw then a lot of colleges expressing their concerns about their ability to foster meaningful dialogue. But deeper than that, administrative concern about students' ability to engage in meaningful dialogue, right? What we've seen since then is that students can actually talk about this and they want to talk about this, right? Obviously, there are examples of things getting out of hand, but there are, in my mind, just as many examples of things going well, right? Hard conversations being had and going successfully.
Yeah. I think that it, and the one thing that, and again, another counter argument that I hear all the time is that that's great to have a position of institutional neutrality, but what if blank insert whatever it be, what if it's about human rights, or what if it's about a violation of this, that, or the other thing? And that's the argument that I hear sort of get thrown out. And I think
Yeah.
that is sort of paired with what if that invites extremists that want to now come into the space because it is, welcoming to them,
Yeah.
and they end up making that space unharmful. Do you ever run into that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one, we have to consider how you define harm, right?
Yeah,
We have a right to safety. We don't have a right to never being uncomfortable, right?
yeah,
And so sometimes we have to be uncomfortable. Sometimes we will be uncomfortable, right? We should always be safe, and colleges should ensure that students, no matter what they believe, are safe, right?
mm,
But they can't ensure you'll never hear something that you don't disagree with, you
yeah,
know. Then we start thinking about, okay, well, what about extremism, right? And are we providing a space for extremist views or voices to come in and share, right? Well, I would push back on that and saying, if we exclude them, what happens to them? Where do they go, right?
yeah,
They're not going to just disappear, right? So they'll fester, they'll grow, they'll compound on one another. And so, in my mind, I would rather engage with those ideas and say, here are all of the reasons I think what you are saying is astronomically incorrect and wrong, as
hmm,
opposed to saying, I never want to hear this again, and I'm going to move through life hoping I never encounter it again, because the
yeah,
odds of that happening are very, very low, right? It will come
yeah.
up again, and it will probably come up in an even stronger way because it's been excluded.
Yeah, that's something that a friend of the show, Claire Ashcraft, said, is that ideas don't go away; they go underground, and
Yep,
then you
exactly.
don't. And I agree. Like, I would rather know who holds those positions,
Yeah,
because then we know who we have to reach out to.
yeah.
If we're
No,
if and I don't think that the ultimate end goal is to change people's minds, but I think it's a pretty frequent byproduct of what the movement is doing. Like, changing minds is not something that is rare, I don't
yeah.
think.
No, I absolutely agree, right? And I think that when we alienate extremism, right, and try and say, oh, well, there's no space for this, right? Like I think you said, Claire said, right? It just
Mhm.
goes underground, and that echo chamber that it exists in becomes so much stronger. And that, I think, feeds into making these views even more extreme, right? Because
Yeah.
they're not existing in the marketplace of ideas. They're existing in this silo where it just bubbles and feeds on one another. And so, they're not getting any other perspectives or ideas that might cause them to reconsider what they're saying or thinking.
Yeah, yeah, and like Ross Irwin is another way of saying it, is that when people can't express their opinions in a constructive way, they'll eventually do it in a destructive way
Yep.
if you
Yeah.
don't give them an outlet to do that. And I
No.
think the one thing that bothers me is that I think that one of the oddly specific misconceptions that I get all the time is that if you sort of open up the space to more right of center opinions on a college campus like Point Park, that all of a sudden Nazis are going to start showing up. And I don't know about you, but I have not met a Nazi yet doing this. And
I
I'm
haven't
pretty
either.
sure, and I'm pretty sure, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I'm pretty sure if you take the data from Braver Angels and Bridge USA, that's tens of thousands of people engaged over the last 6 or 7 years. I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure we're still at zero Nazis present, or at least zero Nazis causing trouble.
Yeah. And right, I think this goes back to kind of what we were talking about, related to media sensationalization, right?
Mm,
What sells is Nazis on campus, right? That's a juicy headline,
yeah,
right? But the reality is, when you start having conversations with people, and I have sat through so many conversations with people
mm,
that I disagree with, you realize that they're not as extreme as you think they are, right?
mm,
It's a lot easier to say, oh, well, this person voted for Donald Trump, therefore they're a Nazi, when you don't know anything about that person, when you
yeah,
haven't had a conversation with that person, when you haven't taken the time to sit down and say, well, why did you vote for Donald Trump? Or why did you vote for this person, right?
yeah, yeah. I had a professor say that. I had a professor just make a quick little side comment.
Yep.
and said that called Trump supporters terrorists and then continued teaching class, just carried on.
Yeah.
Well,
And and that's where I think bridging work is so important, right?
yeah.
My dad is a Trump supporter. He's not a
Hmm.
Nazi. He's not a terrorist, right? I've spent a
Yeah.
lot of time coming to terms with why he voted for Donald Trump, right? And I really do have a better understanding of it, right? I don't agree with it, but he is a kind man, and
Hmm.
he felt seen, right, in a way that I don't think he's felt seen by other candidates before. He is a hardworking, blue collar American, and he felt like the Trump campaign spoke to him in a way that was, draining the swamp, right?
Hmm.
He's somebody that existed outside of politics, right? Not because he has any crazy radical views, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so it's having conversations like those where you start to understand why somebody believes what they believe, especially based on their own personal experiences, that you're able to say, oh, okay, I still disagree, still didn't vote for the guy, but I can maybe understand a little bit more why you did. And I wish you didn't, but you're entitled to that. You're entitled to cast your vote how you want. You're entitled to support who you want because that's the country we live in and that's what makes us so strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I jokingly told all my progressive friends that I voted for Joe Biden because I didn't give up on him. I didn't. I
What was
still
the
believe.
reaction you
They knew I was joking, I think, so they laughed. Yeah,
got?
because
Yeah.
most of the time, whenever I say something like that, people know that I'm not being serious.
Never give up on Sleepy Joe.
I can't give up on him, and I will never give up on Hunter Biden. I will never give up on him. He's free. He's been pardoned. It's happened. He's yeah. Okay. It looks like we're back. Sorry about that, folks. We had technical difficulties. What even were we talking about before we paused? Oh yes, about Hunter Biden.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, we'll move on from that.
Never giving up on Sleepy Joe.
I'm not giving up on them. No. No, it was really funny. Jon Stewart had a really funny bit. Like they played the news clip where it was like he's been pardoned from any crimes that he has has committed or may have committed over the last 11 years, and Jon Stewart goes, 11 years is oddly specific.
It is. It is.
No, it has to be 11 years, not
Not
10. It
12,
has to
not
be,
10.
no, not 12.
Specifically 11.
11 years. And then Jon Stewart goes, and you'd better cover New Year's Eve this year. It's going to get wild.
Also, there's a preemptive pardon for the future 11 years.
Yes. The preemptive pardon. What did Tim Dillon do? Tim Dillon goes, well, he certainly had a healthy budget for fun. Okay. Anyway,
No comment.
moving on. Moving on. Okay. Back to bridge building stuff. So something that I've experienced a few times, and I've talked to some people about this. About like Manu and Ross about this, and some other
Yeah.
people, and I haven't really quite figured out uh, how I feel about this. But sometimes I don't feel like I'm the right person to lead certain conversations. Like the Israel Palestine one was a big thing. Like I wanted to do it, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I didn't feel confident in Point Park's like in the sense like getting any sort of like equal representation of opinions.
Mm.
I just wasn't really feeling confident in, and also just like feeling like someone else should be doing that and not me.
Yeah.
Do you ever experience that?
Yes and no. And so I think it's really interesting, right? You just raised actually 2 points that they're separate in my mind, right? Which is being the right person to lead the conversation and then ensuring that the conversation has all of the voices that need to be a part of it. And so I want to
Yeah.
talk to the first one first.
Okay.
So I am a white middle class woman. I have
Mm.
experienced a lot of privilege in my life that I'm incredibly grateful for.
As have
And so
I.
I don't have firsthand experience as someone with a marginalized identity, right? I don't know what it's like to be a person of this color or to be a person of color in this country, right? I don't know
Hmm.
what it's like to experience poverty in this country, right? And so, in that sense, I don't have the firsthand experience where I can, say this is, my opinion, or this is what I know about race relations, or, Israel Palestine, right? Things like that I don't have personal connection to.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, what I have come to realize over the past few years is being an excellent facilitator is not about providing the conversation, but about guiding the conversation, right?
Okay.
So I've actually moderated quite a few different conversations, debates, dialogues on race and race relations in this country, on reparations, on Israel Palestine, right? And in those spaces, what I've realized is my voice isn't the one that matters in this
Hmm.
space, right?
Yeah.
And what I think about the issue isn't what matters in this space. What matters as a facilitator and moderator is creating a space where the people who do have firsthand experience or knowledge about whatever the topic is feel safe and comfortable participating. And so it's kind of a double-edged sword, but I think, my advice would be taking a step back from am I the right person to facilitate this conversation, and
Hmm.
reframing your perspective to how can I make space for this to be productive for the people who should have the strongest voices in this conversation, right?
Hmm.
Again,
Yeah.
right? Like moderating is not about providing the conversation, but guiding it.
Yeah. That's a good point. Okay. I'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Um,
And then I think the second part, right? The second point you made is like, are all of the voices in the room present that should be that should be sharing on this, right? And so going into those events, right, as a moderator, knowing, we have done everything we possibly can to advertise to all of campus, right,
mhm.
to groups on both sides of the issue, right, groups that have firsthand experience with the issue, right, thinking about Israel Palestine, making sure that we're reaching out to pro-Palestinian groups on campus and reaching
Mhm.
out to Jewish organizations on campus, saying this is something that we're doing and we want you to come, right? Because this isn't us giving a lecture. This isn't us saying this is what fact is, right? This is us providing a space so that other people can share their stories, their beliefs, their perspectives.
Yeah, that's also a good point. And do you have any advice for dealing with like toxic campus culture? Because the sort of conclusion that Gavin and I have reached about Point Park is that there are some diverse opinions out there. Like there aren't a ton of conservatives, but there are a few,
Mm.
and they don't feel comfortable coming out to talk. And I've even heard from some left leaning students that say they aren't really comfortable giving their opinions either.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just because the sort of overall school culture is uh, kind of stifling in that way. And I think that people are afraid of, reputational damage or even, uh, professors grading their papers or they're, getting harsher grading because they've
Mm.
upset the professor by saying something. And I don't really know how to help people. I don't really know how to help, get people out of that and also make the space more friendly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I'd love to know how you understand and define like toxic campus culture, right?
Hmm.
Because again, right, like that, I think there are kind of two things that I'm hearing you say, right? Which is one, students don't feel comfortable because they're scared of the social repercussions, but
Yeah.
then they're also nervous about the academic ones from professors, right?
Yeah.
And so thinking about the academic ones from professors, that's why institutional neutrality is important, right?
Yeah.
because students need to feel comfortable enough to say, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it, so that they can engage in this marketplace of ideas and they can hear things that they differ, that they have differing opinions from, and they can learn, right? We learn from engaging with people we disagree with, and we develop, stronger capacity for empathy, but also, more well-rounded opinions, more educated opinions, right? So there's that side of things. On the social repercussion side of things, I guess I would ask people, why are you scared to stand by what you believe, right?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's not maybe not even the entire university, because I do have some professors. I think the professor makes a huge difference, because I have some professors that do a really good job at creating a space where I feel comfortable, voicing some opinions that might not be popular. It's in particularly in the media space, I think, because I have a lot of media-based classes. So talking a
Mm-hmm.
lot about like codes of ethics and journalism and misinformation and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
have some opinions that are probably not as popular. Um, but I feel comfortable saying those things with certain professors because they create a space where I feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah.
And then I have a professor, the one that labeled half the country as terrorists. She didn't open up, like, if you're going to make that comment, which I don't even think a professor should be making in the first place.
Yeah.
She didn't open up the floor for anyone to be like, I disagree with that, or that's crazy, or anything like that. It was just kind of, so I think in Point Park's case, the sort of stifling culture is the fact that I think that there are professors that get a little bit too ideological, and then there are students that ideologically agree with them that are a little bit too comfortable just throwing out statements.
Yeah.
And most of them are opinions, but they're stated as facts. And the
Yep.
professors don't ever check them or stop them, or open up the floor for anybody else. They just move on.
Yeah.
And yet they'll, but then at the beginning of the semester, I was told that this classroom was supposed to be an open space for free inquiry and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's
Mm-hmm.
so it's just been kind of a weird thing to have that at the same time, and I don't really know how to help, because I'm sure there are some students that think that's crazy. I mean, I have friends that think that's crazy, like, and I think it's crazy, but I
Yeah.
don't really know how to help those people in that situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Sorry, that was a lot. I like rambled. I don't even know if that makes sense.
it does make sense, right? And it's something that we're seeing pretty rampantly across higher education right now. And so I think that that is where we see the need for institutional change, right? And
Yeah.
culture shift. And it happens slowly, right? But that's why the work that the College Debates and Discourse Alliance and Bridge USA are doing is so important, right? I think that the work that Bridge USA is doing is really, beneficial and focused around, the student and the socialized side of things, right? But when we're looking at institutional change, that's where I think work that the College Debates and Discourse Alliance with our curricular toolkit, right? Hosting orientation programming and classroom programming, right? Where we're starting to see faculty and administrators engage in these spaces as well, is where we will hopefully start to see institutional change and cultural change
Mm.
come from. And it happens slowly, right? It happens very, very slowly. But I think there are examples of places where it has already started to happen. And that makes me really hopeful that someday all institutions will be a place where, we really can engage with ideas.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is changing. And I think that situation that I just mentioned might have been maybe more of an. I hope it's more of an extreme case. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it is going to shift. It is going to take time. So you're doing this work. You're helping facilitate uh, civil dialogue all over,
Mhm.
and but you are still a thinking person. You still have your opinions. Are there any topics that you feel so strongly about that you have a tough time sort of bridging the divide?
Well, my answer is no, right?
Mm,
I think there are topics that I have a tough time bridging the divide, right?
mm,
There are topics that it's hard for me to sit and listen to people that I disagree with, but
Mm,
there is no topic that I am not willing to engage with somebody on, right?
mm,
Because I really truly am somebody who, practice what you preach. And it's hard. I won't lie to you, Carson. It is very hard sometimes. Um, but doesn't mean it's not worth doing.
yeah. Yeah, I was just curious about that because it's it's also tough. I think I've given up. I think I've given up some of my sort of positions that I've had on certain things just because I don't know. I don't have enough knowledge to really make a argument that I'd be comfortable making. I guess if
Mm,
that makes sense. So I've kind of ditched, not ditch. I don't want to say that. It's just more of like another one from I don't know if Claire came up with this, but she says it like holding her strong opinions loosely, kind of thing. Like
yeah.
trying to but even then like it is tough. Like I guess the toughest one for me is the free speech debate is tough. Not that it's tough to listen to people make anti-free speech arguments, but it's for me it's that um I agree with some of their points, and so it's not. I guess that's a different kind of difficulty. That's not
Yeah.
difficulty bridging the divide. That's more of like difficulty picking a side, I guess.
Well, and I think that in many ways is the essence of bridging, right? This reality check that, we don't know everything,
Yeah.
and issues are not black and white, right? They are complex and they are nuanced, and it's okay, one, to not know things. It's okay, two, to change your mind. And it's okay to have a nuanced perspective on a topic. It's okay to say, I really believe this, but I see the point that you're making, right?
Mm,
You can hold those two things, those two truths at the same time. And so when it comes to issues that, I maybe don't have as deep of an understanding about, that's where, for me, the important part of bridging is understanding, right?
hmm
Why does this person believe what they believe, right? And what can I do to better understand where this person is coming from? Even if I think I disagree with them, giving
Yeah.
them the space to share with me, right?
hmm Um, how did your perceptions of the people that you disagree with change from moderating these debates, or I guess like maybe not even of people you disagreed with, but um, I guess just in general, like what changed in the way that you look at the world from doing that work?
Yeah, yeah. So I have moderated conversations on anything and everything, right?
Mm,
Israel and Palestine, trans access to healthcare, race relations, abortion, gun violence, right? You name it, we've talked
mm,
about it. And what I have come to realize from engaging in so many of these conversations in my personal life, but also acting as a facilitator where I'm not sharing my opinions and my ideas, I'm just listening and helping people to share those ideas, is that we all have more in common than we think we do.
mm,
Um, we agree more than we think we do. And at the end of the day, most people generally want the same things, right? We want to be safe. We want to be able to exercise our freedoms. We want access to to the things that support us and support our basic rights, right?
mm.
It's just how we go about achieving those things, right? And
Yep.
so I think about some of the most contentious issues, right? Like gun violence is a great one.
Yeah.
The argument of safety is made on both sides of
Yes.
that argument, right? It's
Yeah.
just, how do you think we create safer communities, right? How do you think we create safer schools? And where people differ is in the how, right?
Yeah.
And when we take a moment to listen to, well, why do you think that's the way to achieve it? We realize that difference of opinion comes from us having different backgrounds, right?
Yeah.
Different lived experiences, different perspectives. Um, and so when we can expand our capacity for empathy and really truly understand somebody better for who they are and where they're coming from, I think it's easier for us to bridge that how.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's called the perception gap, is like that
Mhm.
we think that we're farther apart than we are.
Absolutely.
And I think that another thing you mentioned is like that's just applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to
Yep.
all those conversations that you have. I think that's something, I don't know how you work that into curriculum, but I feel like that's something that like young people should be taught. Like
Yeah.
because it reframes the entire way you look at a conversation. You no longer look at someone that thinks that, that people should have AR-15s as like a heartless
Yeah.
person that's okay with school shootings happening. You
Yeah.
can't do it whenever you have to listen to why they, what the need is at the very bottom of that position.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, the way that we're working it into curriculum is, I mentioned we have the College Debates and Discourse Alliance has its
Hmm.
curricular toolkit. And so our curricular toolkit was designed by faculty for faculty to implement Braver Angels style debates in their classrooms, partnered with assignments so that they can, ensure there's, academic rigor with them, but really using the debate model as a pedagogical tool, right, to
Hmm.
meet educational outcomes. And so, we're also in the process, a bit about our new workshop programming. And
Hmm.
so we're in the process of implementing and developing the curricular toolkit for that so that professors can hopefully run that in their classrooms as well. And I think that's where it starts, right? Is just doing more Socratic seminar style discussions, having debates, having dialogues in classrooms so that students are able to engage with one another in a respectful, productive way in the higher education space, and then carry those skills with them outside of the higher education space into their professional and personal lives.
Hmm. And what's the process like of making a workshop like that?
Yeah.
Like what kind of because I imagine that you have to. I mean, I would imagine that you're getting a politically diverse group of people to work on it, if you can, in the sense like you almost need to have a diversity of bias built into the system so that it's not unbalanced, right? Because those are all the sort of considerations you have to take into account of like if a blue walks in, if a red walks in, are they both going to be comfortable doing
Yeah.
this? So, what has that process been like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned, right, we've recently launched our ABCD workshop. And so for
Yep.
folks listening, that is a Braver Campus Dialogue. And this is a solution oriented conversation dialogue model, right? And so after moderating lots of different debates, I really felt like there was a sort of unmet need in the space. And I love Braver Angels debates, but I felt like there was an opportunity to really do more and go deeper, right?
Mm,
Especially because we were encountering topics that weren't necessarily, debatable. You're thinking about something like mental health or sexual
right.
violence. How do you
Yeah.
form a resolution that is, formed in this dichotomy, right? Af neg. You either agree or you disagree. It's really
Yeah.
challenging to frame conversation, or excuse me, debate resolutions around certain topics, but there's still topics that we need to have dialogues about. So
Mm,
we put together kind of a team. And so I worked very closely with Ross Irwin of Bridge USA, as well as Bill Doherty, one of the co founders of Braver Angels. And we really took a deep dive looking at what are the strengths of Braver Angels debates, of bridging workshops, of bridge conversations, of traditional parliamentary style debates, right? And how can we take the strongest elements from every single one of those and combine them to make something new, to meet
mm,
this unmet need where we have a solution oriented conversation, where people are able to really explore nuances and differences, going further than just, well, Carson, what do you believe about this topic? But what do we do about it, right? How do we address the mental health crisis that so many college campuses are dealing with? How
mhm,
can we best address climate change? What is the best way to reduce sexual violence in this country?
mm,
Conversations like that are more open ended, nuanced. To your question about making it balanced and making sure that, every person feels comfortable and engaging in that, it's less about making sure there's an even split between red and blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
More about making sure that we as an institution, an organization, remain nonpartisan. And
Mm-hmm.
so, with all of the guiding questions that we produce for Braver Campus Dialogues or debate resolutions, we try to make them as nonpartisan as possible
Yeah.
so that, you know, folks do feel comfortable engaging regardless of what they believe in.
What do you think? To go back to college campuses. What do you think the reaction was to the election that you saw? Did you do any traveling around? Like, what was your like? Did you do any traveling around like the week before or anything like that, or during?
Yeah. Yeah. So the lead up to the election, there was a lot of anxiety.
Yeah.
And then there was kind of a lull, right? Where people were like, well, we've said what we're going to say. We think we know who we're voting for.
Yeah.
Um, and we'll see what happens, right? Following the election on college campuses, I saw two things. The first was a lot of fear.
Yep.
College campuses tend to be more liberal leaning,
Yeah.
and the populations that are on them tend to be more liberal leaning. And so there was this immediate reaction of fear and despair.
Yeah.
But then what I started to see was hope, right? Uh,
Mm.
it's an incredibly privileged position to be able to give up hope, to say, you know what, I'm done with this. I can't engage with this anymore. I'm defeated and
Sure.
I'm walking away, right? And I think there was a realization of that from a lot of people that
Mm.
if you are upset by the outcome of this election, now is the time to lock in and make your voice heard and
Yeah.
advocate for the changes that you see need to happen in this country, right? We actually had some really, really great conversations post election, on guiding questions like how can our political differences strengthen our community?
Hmm.
How are our values and experiences shaping our post-election reaction, and how
Yep.
should we move forward as a community? And so, regardless of folks' kind of response to the election, either being happy or sad, I'm seeing a lot of communities coming together and saying, how do we move forward? How do we move forward to support the new president? How do we move forward to, challenge the new president and
Hmm.
make sure that the things we need to advocate for are being advocated for?
Hmm. Yeah, I saw there was a lot of confusion, I think, on the first day after. Like, people, I don't think people entirely knew how to react
Yeah.
after seeing the results of that. And I think that people were very angry for
Yeah.
about 2 days. And then what was interesting is that that faded away. I thought for sure that it would last through the week, but it didn't. I think by Friday it was quiet.
Yeah. And I think anger is easy for a lot of people, but
Yeah.
it's not
Yes.
productive, right? And so when we take a step back from that fear and that anger, the deeper reality is, what is it going to lead to besides
Yeah.
headlines and sound bites,
Sure.
right? Is it going to lead to productive, impactful change? Probably not, right? And so
Yeah.
finding a way to move forward productively, I think is what a lot of people are doing. And it's hard. It's really, really hard for a lot of
Yeah,
people.
it is.
The fear and the sadness that some folks are experiencing, I would say is valid, but
Yeah.
I think
I
there's
I wish that I wish that that reaction could have happened without that outcome of that election. Like, that sort of immediate, because it was cool to see like that immediate reaction of, okay, well, now we have to kind of rebuild. Now we have to
yeah,
put safeguards in place and we have to look out for people. I thought
yeah.
that was great. I wish people could have done that without Trump winning the election. But I guess it's not necessarily something, that's kind of something I think that maybe take for granted is the wrong word, but you know what I mean? It's like something you don't necessarily think about until that happens and you go, whoa, now we have to retool.
Yeah, I think so, right? And, personally, I agree. But half of this country doesn't, right?
Right.
There's a large population of this country that voted for him. And so
Yeah.
I think for those of us who didn't vote for him, this is a sign that we need to, you know, not only continue advocating for the changes that we think need to be made in this country, but lean into bridging work now more than ever, right? And
Yeah.
start working to understand why do we disagree with these people, and how can we find common ground with them.
Mm. Yeah, agreed. So what was the experience like? You moderated a debate on the Israel-Palestine conflict at George Washington University.
I did.
What was that like?
Yeah. So we, like I said, right, October 7th, 2023, huge response on college campuses.
Yeah.
Want to talk about what's going on in the Middle East right now. They want to talk about what's going on in Gaza between Israel and Palestine. Um, and so at GW, we had a
Mm.
debate. Should the US cease aid to Israel?
Yep.
We've found that the best way to approach these conversations is by asking people, not about their direct opinion on what's going on, but,
Right.
what should be done about it.
Yeah.
Because that allows for people to still share their opinion about what's going on, but still maintain some semblance of like kind of foresight, I guess.
Yeah.
The debate at GW was intense, right?
Hmm.
We had a room of probably 60, 70, 80 people, maybe 80
Hmm.
people. We put a lot of work into it. We worked with the Bridge USA chapter there.
Hmm.
Absolutely incredible group of student leaders. And I think overall it was a really incredible experience, but it was hard. It was a hard conversation for people to have, right?
Yeah.
You walked into that room and you could feel the tension, right? Because
Yep.
people were really scared. They didn't know what was going to happen, right? They
Yeah.
showed up, I think, in some ways expecting for something crazy to go down, right?
Yeah.
And nothing crazy happened, right? We heard stories on both sides of the issue, right?
Mm.
Where people were sharing like deep, intimate, personal experiences that shaped their views on this. And at the end, we had our debrief and it was incredibly positive. People
Mm.
shared that this was a good experience for them, that they were happy they came and listened. Many people shared that they learned something or, expanded their own perspective. And so I'm really, really proud of the work that we did there.
Yeah, it looked great. And I think that resolution kind of goes back to the thing you were saying about kind of start small. Like you
Yeah,
don't make the resolution is Israel committing like a genocide in Gaza. Like
yeah,
that's not, you don't do that because
yeah,
that's not going to get anybody anywhere. And I think that's the unfortunately, and I think I understand why this is the case, but I think unfortunately that's the one that people jump to right away
yeah,
as sort of a litmus test
yeah,
for whether or not to engage with somebody on a certain topic is like just trying to agree on what that statement means.
yeah.
And
Yeah. And what's
yeah,
so
it's just
interesting,
tough.
Carson, right, is in that debate at GW, we had a lot of conversation about is Israel committing a genocide or not, right? And there were
Hmm.
people that stood up and said what is going on is absolutely a genocide. There were people that stood up and said, I don't see this as a genocide, right? And so
Hmm.
with like the dialogues that we are facilitating, I think it's really important to like emphasize to people that it's not bound by the guiding question or the debate
Yeah.
resolution we're using, right? The point of what we're doing is to bring people together to explore ideas openly and honestly. And
Hmm.
so the resolution or the guiding question that we're using is a starting point, right?
Yep.
Similarly, right, we ran a Braver Campus Dialogue at Columbia.
Yep.
That one, we used the guiding question: what are the most impactful and productive ways for the Columbia community to engage with the Israel Palestine conflict, right?
That's a really cool one.
Yeah,
Yeah, I like
thanks.
that.
Yeah. And so, the reason we picked this was because working with student leaders there is we saw and we heard that one, there was, of course, a lot of fear on campus. We also were up against a little bit of nerves from administration, right?
Yep.
Nerves that, what if students boycott? What if students protest? What if this gets out of hand?
Yeah,
None of those things happened. The
that's
conversation
great.
went really, really well. But in that conversation too, right? The guiding question was the starting point for us.
Mm.
We talked about, do people see this as a genocide or not? Right? We had um, people saying that they served in the IDF, right? And sharing
Oh,
their
wow.
experiences. Yeah. We had people saying that they, were refugees, right? They grew up in
Mm.
Palestine and are now here, right? And so those are not directly related to the guiding question that we started with, but those stories were still shared, right? Because what
Yeah,
we do is ultimately a starting point for conversation.
yeah. Well, that's heavy. That's cool but that's cool that those people all came out and
Yeah, yeah.
talked.
Yeah, and it is heavy, right? I mentioned this earlier that one of the misconceptions about this work is that it's just kind of kumbaya. And
Yes.
I've had this realization, even recently, and I think moderating these conversations has really emphasized it, that the hard conversations, the ones where you walk away, and myself, even as a moderator, I'm like, wow, that was intense. That was
Hmm.
a lot, right? Those are the conversations we need to be having, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is where this work is the most impactful. And it's hard, but it's so worthwhile.
Yeah, because those are the conversations that you think about a week later.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
still think about it. And then that's, I think, whenever people's minds do get changed, because whenever if they got a new perspective that challenged what they believed, and if it was really difficult like that, then not only do they think about it for the next week, but they should have to sit with that for a
Yeah.
while,
Yeah.
because it's not something that happens right away.
No, absolutely. And, I think that we as a society are not comfortable being uncomfortable. We're not
No.
practiced at sitting in discomfort.
Yeah.
But the reality is when we're uncomfortable, that's when we're growing, right?
Yeah. What are some other tough ones been to moderate? Some other tough topics. I
Yeah.
assume, is it always the hot button topics that are tough to moderate, or have there been ones that's kind of surprised you as being tougher than you thought they'd be?
I think it's generally hot button issues.
Okay.
Israel, Palestine,
Yeah.
abortion. Abortion is a
Yep.
really tough one.
Yeah.
Because that often leads into conversations also about sexual violence,
Yeah.
gun violence. You know, I've been in rooms where people have shared that they survived an active shooter situation, where people have shared that they lost a family member to gun violence, right?
Yeah.
And so those are really hard conversations,
Yeah.
but I think that is where the power lies in this work, is creating spaces for people to have those hard conversations. Other tough ones, trans access to healthcare, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Anything we're starting to talk about people's identity is hugely, I think, impactful, but hard to sit through sometimes for people.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
really want to emphasize, just because it's hard doesn't mean it's bad, right? It's good.
Yeah.
One of our, another story that kind of like comes to mind is somebody on our team was chairing a conversation about trans access to healthcare.
Hmm.
And a man stood up and said transgenderism is an abomination, right? Trans people shouldn't exist, they don't exist, it's mental illness, all of these things, right? Immediately following that, we had a trans woman stand up and say, hi, I'm a trans woman, this is who I am, this is why
Mm.
I transitioned, right? Transitioning saved my life, right? And sharing their story. And so being in that space where we were able to hear two just polar opposite views
Yeah.
and have people with two completely different realities come face to face with one another, you can see the wheels turning in people's minds, right?
Yeah.
Where they're like, oh, I've never engaged with a trans person before. You know,
Hmm.
I've never engaged with somebody who lost a family member to gun violence before. And
Yeah.
when you start having those experiences, it changes how you think about issues like these.
Yeah. And I think the gun violence one is particularly tricky for Gen Z because it's just such a problem that
Yeah.
that our generations had to face.
Oh,
So that one I
absolutely.
think has been, yeah, because
It
people have
is.
very strong feelings about that one.
It is. And that's right where, I go back to the fact that people generally want the same thing, Carson. It's
Yep.
just how do we get it, right? And
Yeah.
so I remember a few years ago, I chaired a debate on gun violence and the Second Amendment and gun regulations, and it was in Tennessee. And that same morning was the Nashville Covenant school shooting, right? And
Oh wow.
they're less than a few hundred miles away, right? And
Yeah.
I remember, phone calls and emails, and administrators that we were working with and even students that we were working with were like, oh my God, like this horrible tragedy just happened right in our community. Should we do this? And the response was, yes, absolutely, we should do
Hmm.
this, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Our side of things is safety is our number one priority. And so we always defer to what our organizing partners want to do. And in that moment, our organizing partners said, yeah, this is why we're doing this, right?
Yeah.
This is why we need to have this conversation, right? And then in that debate, right, we heard from people on both sides saying, I think we need stricter gun regulations. I'm a survivor of gun violence. And if we had stricter gun regulations, this maybe wouldn't have happened. And then on the other side of it saying, I lost a family member to gun violence and I now carry a firearm with me because I feel safer. And so,
Hmm.
again, having those people with completely different opposing worldviews and, based on experience, then come face to face with one another, you see the wheels turning in their mind, right? And you see them going, oh, I understand just a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna wrap up here. I have a few questions before,
Yeah.
and then we're gonna go. What do you think it means to be an American today, uh, in 2024?
Yeah. Wow.
We see
Hard
it
question.
seems like we are a nation with an identity crisis right now.
Yeah, that is a big question. I think it means a lot of different things to different people. It makes, well, you shared some of these questions with me
Hmm.
beforehand, and I've been reflecting on this one a lot.
Hmm.
What it means to be an American to me is different from what it means probably for you or lots
Yeah.
of other people in the
What
country.
does it mean to you?
Well, when you asked me about this, I started reflecting, started talking to lots of different people in my life, right? My dad, people I work with, my boss. Everybody gave me something different, right?
Hmm.
And that is what it means to me, right? I think about, why I went to college, for example. I'm a first gen college student, and, I chose to go to college because I wanted to pursue a career in this field or in a political science esque related field. But it all comes down to freedom of choice, right? I'm free to choose to do what I want to do with my life in the way that I want to do it. I'm free to define what it means to be an American. You're free to define to you what it means to be an American, right? It's the fact that every single person in this country has the ability to choose who they are, how they want to live their life. And further than that, right, we have the freedom to question, we have the freedom to disagree, we have the freedom to choose. And I think that that is something that doesn't exist in many places in this world right now, right? You know,
Hmm.
you want to burn a flag, you want to kneel for the national anthem, you want to stand and salute the flag or stand and respect the national anthem, right? That is your choice. And
Yep.
to me, that's what it means to be an American.
What is your favorite part of your job?
Mm, this. Getting to talk to people like you, getting to talk
Well,
to,
thank you.
yeah, no, but seriously, um, getting to talk to so many different people from different backgrounds with different beliefs. It's really expanded my own worldview, how I think about things. Um, it's expanded my capacity for empathy. It's increased my hope for this country and for the world, um, because the more that I learn about all of the different people involved in this work, um, the better I feel.
Mm. Yeah, me too. What advice do you have for young people that want to do this work or that really just want to have a career they can be proud of, that want to, go to college and do the whole
Mm.
thing?
Be open to change and be open to changing your mind. Um, if we were all living the lives that we were living that we thought we were going to be living when we were 16, we would all be in very different
Yeah.
places. You know, we don't know what we don't know. And when I was 16 years old, I had no idea that the job that I have now is something that even existed or would be a possibility.
Yeah.
Um, the political views I hold now are different from those I held 10 years ago. And so
Yep.
be open to change in the sense of changing your own perspectives and opinions about, social norms, political beliefs, things like that, but also about yourself, right? I
Hmm.
think in this space, especially, there are a lot of, poli sci and debate nerds. I say that as a poli sci and debate nerd
Yeah.
who was, this is where I'm going and this is what I'm doing with my life. And that has changed in so many ways, for the
Mm.
better, right? But don't hold yourself to, this is what I'm doing and I have to stick to it and there's nothing else. Because as you learn more and you have more experiences, you have more conversations, you will probably change your mind about what you want to do and where you want to go. And that's okay.
Hmm. And really, last question, and maybe the most important question: do you currently own any Bitcoin? Because I wanted to say congratulations to Bitcoin on its historic rise. No one thought it would happen.
No
Let me
comment. I'm
say,
so sorry.
I should never have sold. I should never have sold my Bitcoin. Anyway, okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you very much for sitting down with me today. I appreciate it. We've had some great
Absolutely.
insights. And good luck with everything, with all the workshops and with traveling around.
Thanks. Thank
And
you, Carson. Yeah. No, it was really nice to chat with you today.
mhm,
I appreciate you having me on your podcast.
of course. All right, well, thank you. Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carson. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.